I've started the recording. Let me remind you, I sent out an email over the weekend. If you didn't see that, be sure to go and look for it. The exam will still be when it is scheduled to be on September 29th, which is a week from today. I changed the coverage. I decided, since everything that's been going on, I will, whereas we were going to go through chapter 27, I'm going to defer that until the second exam. So the first exam will be chapters 1 through 4. Okay? And all the sapling stuff for chapter 27 you will have until the second exam, the day of the second exam, to do that. Yes?
I'm sorry, could you say it one more time? This is sapling part, not the rest.
Yeah, the sapling, question about the sapling assignments. The sapling assignments for chapter 27 will be available until the second exam. Okay, so you don't have to do that. If you've already done that, that's great. But if you haven't, you don't need to worry about those until later on. Also, I put up a revised sapling schedule, and I changed the way I did it. Rather than having everything due Friday at 7 p.m. every week, I just took the assignments for the first exam. I took the number of days that you've got, and I just spread them out equally. Okay? So there's every day, generally there'll be something that is due, but remember, that's just a guide to pace yourself. On Saturday nights, I will look at how you're doing and see that you're making progress. And if I see, okay, they're making progress, then you're okay. Don't worry that, well, I didn't start this one. As long as I see you're making progress, you're fine. If I see that you haven't done anything for a week, then I reserve the right to give you 0 on the things you haven't started doing yet. As long as you're working, you'll be okay. If you're running into problems, feel free to send me an email. I want you to have lots of opportunity to work on the sapling, because I think it will prepare you for the exams. But I know that if I don't have some kind of due date, there will be people who start working on it right at the very end. So I don't want to put stress on you, but I do want to encourage you to not get behind. All right, any questions on anything?
When are the video notes due on Moodle? Like, when should we post them on Moodle?
That's a good question. When you post the notes on Moodle, that's not a big deal to me. Okay? There's some things that are a big deal. The day of the exam is a big deal, because getting the exam scheduled has been kind of tough. So it's important to be here for the day of the exam. Exactly when you put up your marginal revolution notes is not a big deal. I would say try to get it up by the day of the exam, but if you're a day or 2 or 3 after that, that's not a big deal. I'm not going to penalize you for that. Okay? So if we get to the day of the exam and you say, I've got a lot of studying I need to do, and I need to get these notes uploaded, go ahead and study and upload the notes after the exam, because I won't penalize you for doing that. And that reminds me of another very important thing that I don't think I included in the syllabus. I am going to let you use on the exam a 3x5 index card. You can put anything you want on that card, on the front, the back. You can print something out and put it on it. The only rule is it can't be bigger than 3 inches by 5 inches. Other than that, it can be anything. Graphs, I'd say graphs are especially useful, but it's up to you what you put on it. The main benefit to you of using the card is actually in the preparation of it. Because obviously you can't put very much on one note card. So you have to think about, you have to look at what we covered and think about what's really important. What do I need to be sure I remember? And if you spend significant time creating that note card so that you put the things that are really important, you're probably going to be so prepared that you don't really need the note card.
It's an incentive.
I'm sorry?
It's an incentive.
It's an incentive, yes. It gives you an incentive to create a good one, but if you follow the incentive and create a good one, you're probably not going to need it. So, yes, I'm glad I remembered that. I would like you to turn in your note card with your exam because I like to see them, see what you put on it. Other thing about the exam, obviously most of you have emailed me times that you can take the exam, and I think for everybody I was able to let you take it at the time that you want to take it. So everybody will be taking it, well, there is one exception, everybody will be taking it on campus physically and at different times. If you are taking it at 11 o'clock, then it will be in the regular classroom. If you're taking it at 12:30 or 2 or 3:30, it will be in a different classroom, but it will be in the same building. You won't have any trouble finding it, and I will, later this week, I'll send a message that'll tell you which classroom it'll be in. Also put that on my door. So if you get here and you don't remember where it is, you can just go to my door, my office door, and you'll be able to find it there. Any questions? All right. We are talking about chapter 3 and chapter 4. They really are one thing, okay? Because 3 and 4 are dealing with the supply and demand model, which is an extremely important part of what we're learning in this class. It has a lot of little parts, but the key to doing well on this material is to not just memorize a bunch of parts, but to understand what the model is doing. And to do that, you have to see the big picture. You have to go back to, what are we doing in economics? We are studying scarcity. We're dealing with the fact that we don't have enough resources to produce all the things we would like to have. And so we have to decide, what are we going to use our resources to produce, and what are we not going to produce? Who's going to get to use the things that are produced, and who's not going to get to use them? Because of scarcity, we cannot avoid those choices. It's not that we want to limit how much people can have. It's just that there's not enough of everything to go around. So in every society, there's going to be some kind of system or process that determines how much each person is going to get and how much will be produced in various things. We said that there are different types of economic systems you can use. You can have a socialist system where the government answers most of those questions, or at the other extreme, you can have a market economy where property, resources are owned by individuals, and you get to do with the things that belong to you, you get to do what you want as long as you don't break the rules. And in chapter 3, we began thinking about, well, how will things work in that type of economy where there's nobody giving orders and telling everybody what they have to do? And we said that the first good explanation of how a market economy works was provided in a book that was published in 1776. And who was the author of that book?
Adam Smith.
Adam Smith. Thank you. Adam Smith, Scottish philosopher, professor of moral philosophy. And in his book, we said he was arguing against the prevailing view of the day, which was mercantilism. Mercantilists believed wealth was just gold and silver. So if you wanted the country to be prosperous, you needed to make sure gold and silver came in, and make sure that it didn't go out of the country. And so the government, under that view, the government needed to play a very important role in determining what would be done with the country's resources. Adam Smith said, no, that's wrong. He said, wealth is really, or it consists of the things that people value. Good housing, good food, clothing, education. If you have a society where people can produce or can trade for these things that they want, then that is a wealthy society. And you need to focus on how can we produce those things people want, not focus on just the gold and silver. Adam Smith also said the way for the country to become prosperous was not for the government to make all the decisions, but for the government to establish a framework of rules, laws, and then enforce those laws and tell people, don't break the rules. But as long as you stay within the rules, you can do whatever you want. And his argument was that if the government allowed people to engage in pretty much unregulated free trade, then society's resources would be used in the ways that would be most highly valued by people in that society. So rather than having the government say, okay, the most important thing is this, so you go produce this, he's saying the government should simply make the rules, enforce the rules, tell people do whatever you want with the resources that belong to you. And he believed that this would result in a better use of resources, in a certain sense, than if the government consciously tried to produce a good outcome. And he's known for the term the invisible hand. He said, his most famous quote from his books, he said, every individual labors to render the annual revenue of the society as great as he can. He neither intends to promote the public interest, nor knows by how much he is promoting it. He intends only his own gain, but is led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. He's saying if people are allowed to use resources in whatever way they think is good for them, we can trust that they will use resources in a way that they think will benefit them. But he said unintentionally, they will use their resources in ways that will benefit others. He said it's as if there's this hand that you can't see that's pushing them to produce the things that other people will value. And you might think, well, how could that possibly work? That's what really chapter 3, chapter 4 are about. Because the invisible hand is really what economists call the price mechanism. Prices serve extremely important functions in our economy. And we use the supply and demand framework to help us think about how the price of a product is determined. Okay? But before we get into the details of that, let me just give you one example, intuitive example. Let's say that I'm running a computer business and you're all working for me and we're producing a certain kind of computer and we can sell it for, say, $500 each. Okay? And I find out that there's a certain group of customers who want a different kind of computer. They would value this other kind of computer very highly. Okay? They would say they need this other kind of computer. And let's say that our company has the ability to produce this other kind of computer. But it would require that we incur a good bit of cost to do that. So what if I come to you, remember you're the workers, and I say, we're producing computer 1, but lot of people would really like to have computer too. We can do that. They really need it. For us to accomplish that, y'all are going to have to work overtime. You're going to have to work weekends for about a month. You're going to have to work late each day. But I think we should do it because they really need it. How many of you can I count on to show up this weekend? You all going to be here? My guess is you're going to say, well, I'd like to help those people, but I've got other things to do. I've got plans, so I can't just drop the things that I want to do. I'd like to help them, but I just can't do it. You have good intentions, but you're not going to bear a cost in order to help these people you don't even know. And I understand that that's the way you're likely to respond. So I'm not going to come to you and plead that we really ought to help these people. I'm going to come to you and say, we are selling our computer for $500. There are these other consumers who are willing to pay $5,000 a piece. We're going to make a huge amount of additional profit if we do this. Yes, you're going to have to work extra, but I'm going to quadruple your wages while you're doing this. How many people are going to show up? My guess is that there are going to be a whole lot of people who are going to say, now that I think about it, I really do want to help those consumers. Yeah, count me in. I'll sacrifice my weekend. I'll be here. The end result is that those consumers get what they want. If they had to depend on your good intentions and your benevolence, they would have been out of luck. But they're going to get the computer they want because you have an incentive to bear the cost of providing that computer. And where are you getting that incentive from? From the price. The high price, the high price of that computer sends a message. It tells everybody, wow, somebody values this computer a lot. And as the owner of the company, I say, okay, it's in my interest to motivate my workers to sacrifice and help me produce this computer, so I offer you a higher wage. And that communicates to you that your labor is very highly valued here, and it gives you an incentive to show up on Saturday to produce this computer. The end result is that even though you are not motivated by the desire to help these other people, they get what they want. And the way they get it is through prices. When people value something very highly, the price will go up, and that communicates information that this is highly valued, and it creates an incentive for producers to act on that information. So that even if you have a society of people who don't care about each other, even if everybody is just greedy and selfish and only cares about themselves, the producers have an incentive to give the consumers what they want. That's what Adam Smith would say is so great about a market economy. Now, don't misunderstand what he's saying. He is not saying people should be greedy. He's not saying you should only care about yourself. He's saying the great thing about a market economy is that in the worst case scenario, where people only care about each other, producers still have an incentive to give consumers what they want. He would say a society is going to be much better if people do care about each other, do try to help each other. He wrote a whole book, a long book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, on questions dealing with right and wrong. What kind of society is a good society? What is a bad society? So he is often misquoted and misinterpreted. to say that greed is good, he did not say that at all. He said, in a market economy, even if people are greedy, producers have an incentive to give consumers what they want. If one more example, if I'm running a restaurant, and let's say I'm not a very nice person, I don't care about anybody else. I just care about what I want, and I want a big boat, big house, big car. Okay? If I treat my customers in a way that shows them, I don't care about you, I just want my stuff, what's going to happen? I'm sorry? They're going to go somewhere else. If I'm not treating people the way they want, if they say, well, if you know that people want steak and the restaurant says, I don't care what you want, eat hamburger. Well, then customers are going to go somewhere else. And if they go somewhere else, then I don't get that. I don't get revenue. I don't make profit. My wealth goes down. I don't get the things that I want. So in a market economy, even if I am not a nice person and I only care about myself, to get the things I want, I have to figure out, what do other people want? What kind of food do they want? What kind of environment do they want? How do they want to be treated? And I have to treat them that way. And if I do a good job of giving them what they want, then they're going to come back. I'm going to make profit. My wealth goes up. I get the things that I want. So if I'm not a very nice person, but I'm smart, then I will figure out how to give consumers what they want. So consumers will benefit, even though that really wasn't my intention. Adam Smith would say, well, it's much better if you do care about other people. But even if people are selfish, the market economy does a good job through the price mechanism of ensuring that resources are used to give people what they want. Is he saying that because of the price mechanism, all of our problems will be solved? Obviously not. We're always going to have scarcity. People are going to get more of the things that they want in a market economy than in any other type of system. And the reason is because of the price mechanism. Which brings us to chapter 3. Obviously, the price mechanism is very important. So the question then is, well, how are prices determined? And that's where we will go into our PowerPoint. Okay. Overview of the model. Okay. Here's the overview. Okay. Supply and demand is a demand curve and a supply curve and an intersection. In one sense, it's very, very simple. This is the model. Okay. But you have to understand what this graph is representing. Okay. And to understand that, you have to think about, well, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to understand what determines the price of a product in a competitive market. And by competitive market, that in itself can be a very complicated question to answer. And in microeconomics, we go into that a little more detail. But here, we're thinking about a market where you've got lots of consumers, you've got lots of producers, so many that each consumer individually and each producer individually, they say, well, I don't have any control of the price. I'm just a tiny part of this market. Okay? Think about the market for wheat. There's a worldwide market for wheat. Okay? When you think about eating something that uses wheat, do you worry? Do you think about, maybe, if I buy this cereal with wheat in it, that's going to push the price of wheat up? No, you're such a small part of the market nothing you do is going to affect the price of that product. That's what a competitive market is. It's where lots of consumers, lots of producers, and as a result, each individual is insignificant relative to the total. So everybody says, I don't have any control over the price. As a consumer, when you go to buy a product in a competitive market, you say, well, you look and see what the price is, and that's what you're going to have to pay. So here we have our graph. Notice one suggestion about graphs. Anytime you look at a graph, think about it very carefully. One of the biggest mistakes people make is just looking at it very quickly, so they really don't even perceive what's there. You always look, what is the variable on each axis? Here you've got the quantity of whatever the good is. Here, I think we're talking about millions of barrels per day, so that's oil. Okay. On the vertical axis, we have the price of this good. It's always the price per unit. The whole idea of the supply and demand model is that the price of a product is not just up to the consumer. You don't get to just pay whatever you want. And the price is not just up to the producer. They don't get to charge whatever they want. The price is determined by the interaction of all of these consumers and all of these producers. So we use the graph to help us identify what that price is going to be. So here we have the demand curve, and we'll go through the details of it in just a second. Right now, I'm just going to give you a quick overview. The demand, and from sapling, this should be a review to you. And you want to, as I go through it now, any questions you have, write those down, because you want to understand this foundational idea very, very well. The idea of demand is that it's representing consumer behavior. It's telling us the quantity consumers will want to buy at various prices. The idea of supply is very similar. It's representing behavior, but it's representing the behavior of producers. It's showing us how much producers are willing to supply at each price. So we've got the demand that tells us only about consumers. We've got supply that tells us only about producers. Are consumers and producers interested in the same thing? Are they going to think about the price of gas? As a consumer, how does a 50-cent price for gas sound? That sounds pretty good. You would not be upset if you went to the station and said 50 cents per gallon. Okay? For consumers, a low price is what they would like, what we would like. Producers don't really see it that way, do they? They want to make profit. And if they could charge $100 a gallon, they would think that was great. They probably dream about doing that. Okay? So the producers want a high price. Consumers want a low price. How are we going to come to some consensus as to what the price is actually going to be? Well, supply and demand shows us how things actually work in the market economy. That if you know supply and demand, there's going to be one price where those two curves intersect. And we're going to see that in a truly competitive market, the price is going to be pushed to that level. At any point in time, it may be above that, it may be below it. But as people respond to conditions in a market, the price is going to be pushed to that point of intersection. Not that there's anybody who wants to get there. It's just that the interaction between consumers and producers will push us to that point. Whether the consumers like it, whether the producers like it, it doesn't matter whether they like it or not. That is what is going to happen. This is our model. This is what you need to understand. at any point in time, in a competitive market, there's going to be a demand curve, there's going to be a supply curve that determines the equilibrium. Okay? In a second, we'll talk about demand. We'll talk first about why the curve is negatively sloped. Then we'll talk about what can shift that curve. And we'll talk about supply, why it's upward sloping. We'll talk about what can shift that curve. And then once we understand that, then we can talk about when various events occur in the economy, what impact is that going to have on the price of the product? Supply and demand is you could say it is a process we use for figuring out what is going to happen to the price. This is not something where you read the question and immediately the answer pops into your head. It's the kind of thing where you read the question, you think about it, you draw the graph, and then you work through it one step at a time until you get the right answer. If you read a question and immediately an answer pops into your head and you put that down, you're likely to not do well. You have to take your time. You have to use the model. We're going to spend today and next time showing how you use the model. So you'll be very disappointed if you get to the exam and then you don't use the model. That often happens. But if you use the model, it will get you to the right answer. All right, questions so far? Okay. Want to remind you of this page, additional resources. If you haven't taken a look at that yet, you really need to do that. For one thing, it has this page, study guide for chapter 3 and chapter 4. It's kind of a summary of the important things from those chapters. You click here and that will take you to it. It takes you through it very, very slowly, one step at a time. That will be helpful to you. Then there's some practice questions that I put up. Some of those deal with comparative advantage, some other things, and then there are videos that go through how you work through those questions. The most important thing is that you follow the process that will get you to the right answer. The biggest mistake people make is they don't follow the process. They have this flash of what they think the answer is, and then they put that down. If you go with that flash, you'll get the wrong answer. You've got to take the time to go through the process, and it will lead you to the right answer. Okay? And then down here, there is a review of supply and demand concepts. So all of these are reviews that I've recorded at various points. So if you struggle with supply and demand, spend time on these, because many of those I've recorded specifically for people who really had trouble with supply and demand. So pay attention to these suggestions, and that will help you. Okay. I'm going to be reading from the supply and demand basics sheet. Just a second. Okay, we talked about what demand was, what supply was. Let me read you just a definition for a demand schedule. Okay? The schedule showing the quantity of a good that consumers would be willing and able to purchase at various prices over some period of time, other things being equal. It kind of takes a while to say that. And it takes even longer to think about what it means. But you have to take the time to do that, because all of those parts of the definition are important. Give you an example of a supply schedule. Okay, this would be demand schedule. This would be an example of a demand for oil schedule. Notice it has a column for price, has a column for quantity demanded. Okay? What is it showing you? It's showing you for each price, the quantity that consumers will choose to buy, other things being equal. There are lots of things that are going to affect the quantity of oil that is demanded. When we went into the pandemic and the government shutdown, that definitely had a huge impact on the demand for oil. When we look at a particular demand curve, we are holding all those other things constant. We're saying if the world doesn't change, but the price changes, what impact will that one change have on the quantity demanded? And here you can see this is saying if the price is $55 a barrel, quantity demanded will only be 5 million barrels a day. If the price goes down to $20, what happens to quantity demanded? It increased. It increased. We're saying that when the price of a product goes down, quantity demanded of that product is going to go up. Very, very intuitive, but it's something people often forget. They don't think about. That is the law of demand. But be careful to understand what it is saying. It is not saying anytime the price goes down, the quantity demanded will go up. The law of demand says if the price goes down and everything else that affects consumers stays the same, then the quantity demanded will go up. If the price goes down and some other things change that affects the consumer, that we don't know for sure what's going to happen. The demand curve is holding everything but the price of the product constant. This is the law of demand. And it works the same way in the other direction. If something becomes more expensive, other things being equal, people cut back on the amount they want. If we were looking at the demand for T-bone steaks, okay? And if, I don't know what they cost, let's say they're $20 a piece. And let's say there's, in a certain area, the quantity demanded was 100. Well, if the price of T-bone steaks went from $20 to $60, some of those people who had wanted a steak before will decide, no, it's not worth it. Price of something goes up, the quantity demanded will go down if everything else that affects the consumer remains constant. And the demand schedule gives us the demand curve. It's just a different way of representing that information. We've got the price and quantity combinations. Each price quantity combination gives us 1 point on the demand curve. So this gives us that, 20 and 25 gives us this, 5 and 50 gives us that. Notice the law of demand, that inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, is giving us a demand curve that is what? What's the slope? It's negative. The demand curve is negatively sloped. All that means is there's an inverse relationship between the price per barrel and the quantity demanded. Something becomes cheaper, people want more of it. Price goes up, it's more expensive, people want less of it. That's what the negatively sloped demand curve is telling us. Pretty reasonable and obvious idea. Okay, consumer surplus, that is something you need to be familiar with. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. May spend some time on it next time, but you do need to understand it. It's covered pretty thoroughly in the book. But I want to today get other things like shifting the demand curve. Okay, if this is the say this is the demand for gas. This is the price of gas. Again, the demand curve for gas is going to be negatively sloped. But is the price of gas the only thing that affects how much people use? Certainly not. There are lots of things. An obvious example would be when the government shut the economy down. People aren't going to work. People aren't going to restaurants. People aren't going bowling. People aren't generally going on vacations. So if you're not going places, what happens to the demand for gas? It's going to go down. It's going to go down. Okay? So when you have the pandemic beginning and you have the government lockdown, that decreases the demand for the product. Okay? You started out with an initial demand curve. Now we get a new demand curve. We are going to make a huge deal over the difference between shifting the curve and moving along an unchanged curve. It may not seem like an important difference to you, but I promise you, if you want to get really confused, just use these terms interchangeably. Okay? If you don't want to get confused, you want this to be relatively easy, focus on the difference between those. When let's say that say the price of oil here is $20 per barrel. According to that demand curve, the quantity demanded is, read down, okay, it's going to be 25. If I tell you that nothing has changed except the price of oil has gone up to $55 a barrel, will that change the demand for oil? Absolutely not. When the price of the product goes up, that will change the quantity demanded. It does not change the demand for the product. We're making a big distinction between demand and quantity demanded. If that seems confusing, that's okay. It is confusing. But once you understand what the distinction we're making, it's not confusing. Okay? Quantity demanded is exactly what it sounds like. It is the quantity that consumers want to buy at a particular price. Okay? So if the price is $20, what is the quantity demanded? 25. If the price is 55, what's the quantity demanded? It's only 5. If the price of this product changes, the quantity demanded does change. If the price of this good changes, we move up along the demand curve. Okay? A change in the price does cause a movement along the demand curve. But what is demand? Demand is a relationship between the price of the product and the quantity demand. Demand refers to this entire schedule. Demand refers to this entire curve. When you have a change in demand, that means that all of these numbers here would change. When you have a change in demand, it means that this entire curve is going to shift either to the right or to the left. So we're saying if there's simply a change in the price of the product, that does not change the demand for that product. It changes simply the quantity demanded. And when there's a change in the price of the product, it does not shift the curve, it just moves you along the curve. Okay? Now, we know there are other things that affect how much consumers will want, such as income, such as prices of other goods. Go back to the T-bone steak. If their salary is increased, they're probably going to want more T-bone steak and more other expensive food. If their income goes down, they're probably going to want to buy less. There are lots of things that affect consumers. Price of the good you're looking at is important. And then you have all of these other things that also affect consumers. And here's the key point. Sometimes you have to hear it more than once for it to really sink in. If any of these demand shifters, if any of these other things held constant for the demand curve change, then the whole demand curve is going to shift. Okay? In the previous graph where the price changed, we moved up along the curve. That was not a shift of the curve. That was not a change in demand. But here, if we have a change in one of these other factors that held constant for the demand curve, then the whole curve is going to shift. Okay? So we would say that when, for example, if we're talking, let's say we're talking about, change this to steak again. Steak. And steak. So we start out, this is the initial demand curve. Let's say at a price, we'll assume that the price is $20 per unit. And in a certain region, the quantity demanded is 100. Okay. If the economy goes into recession, as we've done now, okay, where lots of people lose their jobs, incomes have gone down, okay, do you think that at that same $20 price, the quantity demanded is still going to be 100? No, there's going to be a lot of people who were going to buy a steak who now say, no, I can't afford that. I'm going to buy something cheaper. Okay? So let's assume that we know that if the price remains at $20, the quantity demanded is going to be something smaller. We don't know exactly how much it's going to be, but let's say it'll be 60 units. We started here, we're moving to here. We would say this is a change in the demand for steak. Because of a change in one of these shift factors, change in income, the demand for this product has decreased. People aren't buying less because the price went up. They're buying less because of a change in income. And if any of these things change, then the whole demand curve is going to shift. If it shifts to the left, as it has shifted here, then we would say this is a decrease in demand. If it shifted to the right, what do you think we would call that? An increase in demand. Okay? Now, sometimes it's a little complicated. Change in income, there are different kinds of goods. We're going to, or in sapling, you should have come across the idea of a normal good and the idea of an inferior good. By normal good, we just mean the type of good where as your income goes up, you demand more of that product. Steak would be a good example of that. We expect that people, if their income goes up, they're probably going to want more of expensive, high quality foods. Okay? And if their income goes down, they're going to cut back on it. Okay? The opposite is an inferior good. Okay? And that is just a name we give to a good that is the opposite of a normal good. The definition is as your income goes up, your demand for that product goes the other way, it goes down. And you think of something that for you might be an inferior good. And if your income tripled, you wouldn't use more of it, you would use less of it. Example I hear a lot is ramen noodles. That people eat it not because they think this is the best thing in the world, but because it's cheap. And so if your boss says, you're doing a great job, I'm going to triple your salary, you don't say, great, I can now eat 3 times as many ramen noodles. Okay? Instead, you're likely to eat less or fewer ramen noodles, and you're going to eat more higher quality products. Okay? An inferior good, it doesn't mean there's something bad about it. It generally means it's a relatively low quality product, which people consume because it's cheap. And as their income goes up, rather than eat more of it, they switch into a higher quality product. Right? So let's say that this is the demand for ramen noodles. And let's say the economy goes into recession, as it has. What would you expect to happen to the demand for ramen noodles as we go into recession and people have lower income? Which way is the demand for ramen noodles going to shift?
To the right.
It's going to shift to the right or up. Okay? So the producers of ramen noodles, when they read in the paper we're going into recession, they think this is great. People are going to want to buy more of our product. We're going to make more money. And that is because it is an inferior good. If they read in the paper, looks like the economy is really improving, we're coming out of recession, things are going to be great pretty soon. If you're producing ramen noodles, you think, this is a problem. So it's very important to understand that distinction. These other factors that we've listed here, likewise, are things that have a direct effect on consumers. And that means that if any of them change, the whole demand curve is going to shift. Now notice, we haven't been saying anything about producers. We're only talking about consumers. Because when we talk about demand, that is a curve that is describing what consumers are going to want to do. It's describing quantity consumers will want to buy at a particular price. Okay? Let's pick one more example here. Price of substitutes. What are substitutes? Think about simple example. If you're thirsty, what might you drink? You want a soft drink. Well, you might buy a Coke. You might buy a Pepsi. They're both soft drinks. They do similar things. And so they are substitutes. Two things are substitutes if they do pretty much the same thing. You might use one, you might use the other. If you want to buy a truck, well, you could buy a GM truck. You could buy a Chevrolet. You could buy a Nissan or a Toyota. I'm not going to buy all of them. Okay? You don't say, well, I bought a Nissan, so I think I'll buy a GM truck to go with it. No, you want a truck, and you choose between those different options. If this is the demand for Coke at a point in time, that means the quantity of Coke would be here, and the price of Coke would be here. Okay. Let's say that initially the price of Coke is $1 per unit, and let's say the price of Pepsi is also $1, or let's say it's 90 cents per unit. Okay? This is the information we're starting with. Pepsi's 90 cents, Coke is $1, and our demand curve is showing us that quantity demanded in a certain area would be 500. Okay? Now let's ask the question, what if the price of Pepsi goes up? We don't know why, but we're just told the price of Pepsi has gone from 90 cents to $1.20. What effect is this going to have in the market for Coke? Is this going to change the demand for Coke, or is it just going to change the quantity demanded of Coke? Is it going to shift the curve, or are we just going to move along the curve? Well, Pepsi and Coke are substitutes for each other. The price of substitutes is one of those shift factors. So that's a pretty good hint that the demand curve is going to shift. Okay? But let's think about why. Under the initial conditions, Coke was $1, 500, quantity demand is going to be 500. Because Pepsi is now more expensive, think about how consumers are likely to react. You're going to have some consumers who are going to the store planning to buy Pepsi because they thought the price was going to be 90 cents. They get there, they decide, or they see it's more expensive than I was expecting. Some of those Pepsi shoppers decide, well, if it's that expensive, I'm not going to buy Pepsi. What are they going to buy? Something else like Coke. So when the price of this substitute good goes up, the quantity demanded of Coke is not going to be 500 anymore. It's going to be something bigger. Let's say it goes up to 580. Okay. So we now have this point. At a price of $1 for Coke, quantity demanded of Coke is 580. What do we do at that point? What does it represent? It's not on the demand curve. It's on a new demand curve. The demand for Coke has shifted to the right. It's an increase in the demand for Coke. Why did it happen? Because the price of a substitute good went up. And this is a general principle we're going to see. When the price of one good goes up, the demand for all substitutes for that good will increase. Pepsi became more expensive, so the demand for Coke increases. It's a shift of the curve. Always look at the graph and ask, Is demand shifting, or are we just moving along the curve? Here, the whole demand curve is shifting to the right. And if Pepsi had, price of Pepsi had gone down to 50 cents, then we would expect the opposite. Some people who had gone to the store planning to buy Coke, they see Pepsi is so cheap, they say, well, I'm going to buy less Coke, but buy more Pepsi. Right? Very, Coke and Pepsi, that's not a really important decision people make, but this is illustrating a principle that applies to everything that we do, individually and as a society. We make choices, and we substitute one thing for other things. And remember, our whole point of this is to get an understanding of how prices are determined. We'll come back to some of these other shift factors. Next time when we get into some examples. Let's see here of how to use this analysis. In the time we have left, I want to go ahead and jump over to supply. If you understand demand, you shouldn't have any trouble understanding supply, because it's exactly the same idea. It's just with demand, we're talking about the behavior of consumers. And with supply, we're talking about the behavior of producers. Okay? Our graph looks very similar. On the horizontal axis, we've got quantity. On the vertical axis, we have the price of the product. The supply schedule, if you go to the supply and demand basics page that I put up, it's a schedule showing the quantity of a good that producers would be willing and able to supply at various prices over some period of time, other things being equal. And so here you see a supply schedule, lists different prices. It lists the quantity that would be supplied. And remember, what we're saying here is if the price changes, but everything else that affects the producer remains the same, these numbers are describing how the producers will respond. It's describing their behavior. With demand, we saw that when the price of the product goes down, what did the quantity demanded do? Went up, okay? The law of demand. Do you think we're going to have the same relationship with supply? No, exactly the opposite. Okay? If here we see if the price is only $5, well, demanders, consumers, we think that's great, but we're talking about supply here. Okay? And for producers, the low price isn't much incentive for them to produce the product. And so you don't get producers producing very much. The only people who will produce the product are the people who can produce it at a really low cost. If the price is higher, then there are more people who are willing to supply that product. It's all about incentives. And as the price gets higher, more and more people are willing to supply this product. I like to think about ice cream, dips of ice cream. How many dips of ice cream will be supplied at different prices? Well, if you're at a baseball game and the price is $1 per dip, well, you're going to have some producers who are willing to supply some amount. If they can sell it for $5 a dip, you're going to have a whole lot more people who are willing to supply ice cream at the baseball game. What if you could sell ice cream dips at the baseball game for $100 a dip? If you could do that, I would stop teaching. I would go out and I would sell dips of ice cream at a baseball game. The higher the price for anything, the greater the incentive for somebody to provide that product. So as the price goes up, you're going to get more and more of it being produced. And that is what the law of supply is saying. And as the price of a product goes up, other things being equal, the quantity supplied of that product is going to go up. Okay? There's a direct relationship between the price of the good and the quantity supplied of that good. You see that in the supply schedule, and you see it in the upward slope of the supply curve. When the price is low, small quantity supplied, but the higher the price, the greater the quantity supplied is. Okay? We talked about the difference between demand and quantity demanded. Have the same difference here with supply and quantity supplied. When we have something that shifts the supply curve either to the right or to the left, that is a change in supply. If you just have a movement, if you go from one price to another price, okay, that's just a movement up along the supply curve. That's a change in the quantity supply. Okay? If the price of the product itself is changing, you're moving along the curve, you're not changing supply. But there are things that will shift the curve. And here we have the factors that generally are important for shifting the supply curve. Notice we've got things that shift demand, got things that shift supply. They are not the same things. You have to understand each factor each shift factor and understand why it shifts the curve. For example, changes in the price of inputs. If we're talking about, this is the, we'll say oil is used to produce gasoline. Okay? If the price of oil goes from $50 a barrel to $150 per barrel, do consumers of gasoline care about that? Are they directly impacted by that? As a consumer of gas, you don't know what the price of oil is. You don't care what the price of oil is. You care, what am I going to have to pay per gallon for gas? Oil is an input into the production of gasoline. The producer of gasoline definitely cares about the price of oil, because the guy who's producing the gas has to go out and buy the oil. And if the price of oil triples, that means his costs have increased very significantly, and it's going to be less profitable to produce the product. So we can say, if the supply of gas was here, we are talking about gasoline, that's the price of gas. If the price of oil goes up dramatically, that's the price of an input. That's a shift factor for supply. So the whole supply curve is going to shift. And so the question is, well, if since oil is now more expensive, are gas producers going to produce more or less? If oil is more expensive, it's now less profitable to produce gasoline. And so they're not going to produce as much gas. Anytime you have an increase in the price of an input, that's going to decrease supply of the output. Okay? It's the producer who's directly affected by that. So it's the supply curve that is going to shift. Okay? Now we've got other factors here that are also important. We'll come back and touch on some of those next time in our examples. But in the last 3 minutes we have, let's pull this together. We have now talked about said for any market, you've got consumers, and their behavior is represented by the demand curve, and the price is important to them. We also have producers. Their behavior is represented by the supply curve, and the price is important to them. Okay? Question is, how's this going to work out? They want different things. So how can we end up with a good outcome where the producers are producing the amount that consumers want? Okay? Well, Adam Smith would say the price mechanism is going to bring us into balance. How does that work? Well, let's say this is market for gas. Let's say the price of gas is $10 per gallon. What's going to happen? Okay. What we're about to do, we only have 2 minutes, but we can get through it, and it's extremely important. If you understand it, you'll be in good shape for the exam. If I'm telling you the price is $10, then the way you go through this question is you say, well, if the price is $10, what will the consumers want to do? And you read horizontally over to the demand curve. You read down. That is the quantity demanded. It's the quantity consumers want to buy. Let's say it's 70,000 gallons. You then say, okay, if the price is still $10, how much will producers want to supply? So you read over vertically to the supply curve. You read down, and that gives you the quantity supplied. And obviously that quantity is going to be bigger than 70. Let's say it's 250. You think this is a good outcome? Think about what it means. It means you've got consumers who want to buy 70,000 gallons. You've got producers using our scarce resources to produce almost 4 times as much as people want to buy. This is not a good situation. The quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. We're going to call that a surplus. Okay? That's not a good outcome. Okay? But we shouldn't be surprised because nobody's in control. Producers are just producing what they think will give them profit. Consumers are trying to get the product at the lowest price they can get. Okay? It's not surprising we can have an imbalance like that. What may be surprising is that when we have an imbalance, the price mechanism then begins to work. And when you have this surplus, think about the producers. They've got all this inventory they can't sell. They're thinking, how can I get rid of it? How can I get people to buy more? What are they going to do? How can they get you to buy more? They can cut the price. And as they cut the price, that is the price mechanism beginning to work. It's telling consumers gas isn't as scarce as you thought. It's okay to use more. And people start to buy more. Quantity demanded goes up. Falling price tells the producers, people don't want as much of this as you thought. You should cut back. And it gives them an incentive to cut back. Decrease in quantity supplied. And as the price falls, notice where we're being pushed. We're being pushed to the intersection, which is called the equilibrium. And at that equilibrium, the quantity consumers want to buy is equal to the quantity producers want to sell. We end up in a state of balance that there was absolutely nobody trying to get us to. Everybody's trying to do what's good for them, but when we let the price mechanism function, then we end up in equilibrium. Which leads to the question, why is it that we have a critical shortage of COVID-19 tests? After months and months, we still have shortages. Why is that? We'll come back and talk about that next time. Let me know if you have any questions.